Today we are going to learn about the credentials provider inside of Next Auth, and we are going to use MongoDB for a database, Prism as the ORM, and we're using Next.js 13 as the framework. So before we get started, if you can hit that like button and also subscribe for more, that would be great. Other than that, let's get to coding. Okay, so if you haven't already, you can create a Next.js 13 project inside of your terminal on your computer system. I'm using version 13.4.9 for this video. If you're watching in the future, it might be a different version, but everything should be the same. So we are using the app directory inside of Next.js, and what we're doing in this video is we are creating a Next Auth credentials provider. This means this allows us to handle the sign in with a username and password. There's other providers like the Google provider and the GitHub, the Facebook provider. I do in my channel have a ultimate Next Auth guide that's about an hour and a half long. It will be linked right here at the top of this video. You could click that and you could watch that guide as well. But let's just continue with what we're doing. And the first thing I want to do is I want to install the Next Auth package. So I'm going to open up the terminal and I'm going to say npm install next-auth. And since I am down here, I'm going to install one more thing, and that is going to be bcrypt, because we are going to hash the password before we send it to our MongoDB database. So we're going to install those two packages right off the bat. After they have been successfully installed, we are going to create a catch-all route inside of our API folder. So we don't have an API folder, so we're going to create that inside of the app directory. And then inside of the API folder, we're going to have another folder called auth. And then inside of that folder, we are going to have a catch-all route. And this syntax is a bracket notation, and it's a spread syntax, so ... next auth bracket. And then it's either going to be route.js or TS, depending on if you're using TypeScript or not. So we're going to use route.js. And now we can start defining this main entry point that allows us to connect to Next Auth. So the first thing we have to do is we have to import at the top. So import Next Auth from nextauth/next. We are going to use the credentials provider, so we can import that as well. So it's going to be called credentials provider, just like that. And this is from nextauth/providers/credentials. And we could import bcrypt as well, because we're going to actually use it here in this file as well. So we're installing bcrypt from bcrypt, not bcrypt.js, bcrypt. And the other thing we want to do is now we want to actually start defining our function down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say export const. We're going to call this auth options. And if you do want to know where all the auth options are, you can look inside of the docs, and it shows you all the different options you could pass into the Next Auth object. So you could pass adapters, you could pass providers, you could pass secrets, you could pass debug, you could pass a bunch of asynchronous callbacks that do important tasks when a certain event happens. But we'll get to everything you need to do specifically for the credentials provider. So the first thing is we are going to send the username and password and name back into our database. So what we have to do here is we are going to connect our database with Prism, which is an ORM, to our application. So I'm going to pull up the docs real quick just to show you guys. If you could go to the docs, it's nextauthjs.org. You could go to the search, or you could go over here to these tabs. And what we want is we want adapters, and we're going to use Prism. We can use MongoDB, but Prism is the same thing, and we could use both. So this means we have to install this package, and it tells us how to set it up inside of our catch-all route, and then we could go from there. So let's copy these two here, these two lines, and we go back in our terminal and paste them in. So we're going to install the Prism client and the Prism adapter for Next Auth. So we installed both of those packages. So the first option I want to pass through is called the adapter. And this adapter is going to take in the Prism adapter, which has to be imported at the top, just like that. And we could pass through Prism. So what we could do here is we need to also import the Prism client. So, and we also need to install Prism as well. So we could just click npm install Prism right down below. We install Prism. Now we can import at the top, and we can import the Prism client from prism/client. After this, we can now initialize the Prism client. This is going to allow us to use the CLI from Prism, and we can pass it through our Prism adapter just like this. After initializing Prism client, just like it shows right here in the docs, we can scroll down and we need to create the Prism schema from scratch. So this just verifies the types we are sending to our database. So right here, we can actually copy this whole schema.prism file right here. And the only thing we're actually using inside of this, but we're going to keep it all for our code, is we're using the data source DB object, we're using the generate client object, and we are going to use the user model right here. So they have other models like the session and the account and the verification token, but what you need for the credentials provider is the user. If you're using like a Google provider or a GitHub provider, you are going to need the account schema right here, just like this. So like I said, copy this right here. We are going to go back to our code. In the root of our whole application, we were going to create a folder called Prism. Inside of that, we will call it schema.prism. And then we can just copy that whole code. And then the thing we're going to change is we are not using PostgreSQL. We are using MongoDB. And it's going to throw you errors. Reason why is if we go back to that doc page right here, if you scroll down, we have to change a few things to support for MongoDB. And the things we have to change is the IDs, because the IDs stored in MongoDB start with the underscore ID. So we have to put this decorator behind every ID. And then we also have to put something else, which I'll show you right after we do the IDs. So we're going to replace these with looking like this. So we're going to map it through looking like underscore ID. We got to do it for every ID, just like that. And for the user, just like that. And then what we could do here is we don't need the verification token. And for the user ID string, what we're going to have to do in this file is we are going to make this a @db.objectID, and then it fixes the error for the user IDs. So these need to be object IDs. Same thing with these right here. So we scroll back up, the user ID needs to be db.objectID. And then for the refresh token, the access token is not db text, that's just specific for SQL. It's not for MongoDB, so we can remove those there. And now we have no more errors. And then we could also remove preview features because we won't need this if you're using Prism version 3 or higher, which we are. And then you also don't need the shadow data database URL. And this is how your schema file should look. Now I want to create the database inside of MongoDB so we could actually connect our application to the database. So we're going to Google search MongoDB, and then it should be the first search. And then after that, we can sign in. And then you can either log in with the Google, GitHub, or an email address. We're going to just log in with Google. And then after you log in or sign up, you should land on a page that is very similar to this. And if not, you just try to go to this page right here, and either you click the green button here that says create, or up here at the top left, we will create a new project, and then we have to name the project. So we can name this Next Auth Credentials Video. Name it whatever your project's name is. You don't have to add any members, so we're going to click create project. We're going to build the database. We're going to use the free version right here to the right. We'll use AWS as the provider. Select your recommended region with the star, depending on where you live. You could change the cluster. It's only on the server side, so you're the only one who sees it inside the database. So I'm going to leave mine as is. We'll click create. Now the most important step is your username and password. So I'm going to have a username of bwestwood11. I will keep that password. I will copy it, open up my notepad, paste it in my notepad, which is on another screen. That's why you can't see it. And then we're clicking create user. So make sure you know the password before clicking create user. You click it, we're going to use the local environment. And then also for the IP address, if you want it to reach all IP addresses, you're going to put 0.0.0/0. That means any IP address and any computer can access the database if need be. So we're going to say finish and close, go to databases. This should take either a few seconds or a few minutes to deploy your database. And after it is deployed, you're just going to see a green circle right here that says active. It says right now status updating. So what we could do for now is we could click connect, and we are going to connect via drivers. So connect your application. And actually we're not going to connect to the drivers. We're going to just do it for VSCode directly. So we are going to copy this URI string right here. And what we are going to do is we are going to go back to our VSCode editor. We are going to have a new file in the root called .env. We will call this, we are going to call this database URL. The reason why is because that's how we're going to connect Prism to our database. That's what it's called. So we're going to copy this. We're going to paste it. And now we have to actually go back and copy this again. We're going to press equal and then paste. So that's going to connect our code. And then we got to replace the password with that password that we saved in our notepad just about a minute ago. So we are going to paste this in. And now we have the MongoDB URI string right there that we were able to connect to our Prism schema. And it is good to go just like that. So now we are back inside of the catch-all route, inside of the API folder and app directory. And the first option we passed inside the Auth Options object is the adapter. So we successfully set up the adapter, Prism, and MongoDB. Next, we want to pretty much initialize and say what provider we are going to use. So you could use a bunch of providers, but we are only using one for this tutorial. And that is going to be in an array. So it's going to be inside of an array. And the one we're using is the credentials provider. And the first parameter we have to pass is we have to name it credentials. And we are going to have to name it credentials. And the reason why is because we're actually going to use this later on to be able to sign in. And then inside of the credentials, we could start labeling a few things because Next Auth does provide a pre-built login and register page for you to log in and test out everything you want to do. I'm not going to go to that page, but there is a specific URL you have to follow. And we are going to create our own custom login and register page using some Tailwind CSS components. So what we're going to do is we could just say username, and then we're going to have a label of username, type of text, and placeholder you can just have as JSmith. Not a big deal. Next, we are going to have the password, and then we are going to close the credentials provider. After that, this is the callback that is always and only called inside of the credentials provider called the Authorize callback. So this only initiates when you are trying to log in. So this is where all of your login functionality logic is going to go. So this is where we're going to check the user database to see if the user is actually there. Then if they aren't there, we're going to make sure the passwords match. And then if the passwords do match, we're just going to return the user so they could actually log in. And I'll show you how to set that all up, but we are just going to close this right now, just like that. And then right below this, let's close the credentials provider. And then we are going to go below the providers tab right here where the array is. And then right below that, we are going to have a session, and we are going to have an object that says strategy is true. strategy is JWT. This is a JSON web token, and that is going to allow us to track users via JSON web tokens. So we're going to initialize it just like this. So all of these are objects inside of the auth options, and they're pretty much options inside of Next Auth's documents. So right below the session, we could define a secret. The secret is not necessary, but the secret is necessary in production, so you might as well do it in development so you don't forget. So it should be process.env, and then we're going to have uppercase next auth, and then underscore secret. So we're going to copy this, and the secret is just going to allow us to actually use the JWT token. So inside the env file, we could paste this, equal sign, and then we could have any secret you want. You could just start randomly typing stuff on your keyboard. And what we are going to do here is we could just do this as a string and then just go like this. And then do it as a string like that. And then the one thing I want to make sure that you do beforehand is, as you see in the database underscore URL, we actually want to send this to a specific collection. So I'm just going to name this user, just like that. Because if you don't, it's not going to work. You're going to actually get errors thrown at you. So let's close both of these files. Go back to our catch-all route again. And inside of the catch-all route, you can have another option called debug. So debug is literally going to debug your code based on any errors thrown on Next Auth side. So you can literally have a process.env node underscore env equals development. It's going to throw debug errors. That means in development, we're going to get errors. When you push a production, it's not going to throw any errors. So this allows us to code easier and more efficient. So after the auth options down below, we're going to initialize a handler, and then we're going to use that next auth that we import at the top, and then we're going to pass through the auth options just like that inside of that next auth import. And then we have to export it using HTTP request. So it's going to be a handler as a get, and then handler as post. This is going to allow this route to take any get and post requests that Next Auth provides. So that allows us for sign-in functionality, logout functionality, any kind of functionality that Next Auth provides. It is usually a get request or a post request, and this is a catch-all route. So the only thing we're going to have to come back and do inside of this catch-all route is we're going to have to define the logic inside of the Authorize callback function. Next, though, we are going to start working on the register page. So to do that, I'm going to go, before we even do that, I'm going to clean up my folders and files a little bit. I'm going to remove everything in the global CSS except lines 1 through 3. Inside of page.js, which is our home page, I'll remove everything inside of the main. We will have a main element tag as well. We can have an H1 that says nextauth.js. We can have a link component, so we could actually navigate to specific pages. It takes in the href, and we will go to /register, and then we're going to say register page, and then we'll also have a login page. And this is going to be on localhost 3000. This is the home page that I am coding on right now. It's just inside of the page.js, inside of the root layer of your app directory. So after that, we can remove the image import at the top. And then we are going to create a new route called register. So you're just creating a new folder. We'll have a file inside of it called page.jsx. We could do RFC. And then we could type register page. The function could be named whatever you want. And I use the ES7 snippets, which allows me to do RFC for a functional component just like this. So the next thing I want to do is I want to actually use Tailwind's components, like I said. So if we go, and they do have paid versions and they have free versions as well. So Tailwind CSS. We just go to the first search result. We go to the components, and you could either click templates or you could scroll down and you can look through all of the templates or components. And what we're going to do is we are going to use where is the login and register? Here we go, sign in and register. So we're going to use these right here, and they are just quick and easy, so we don't have to code out the UI. So that is what we're going to use. So I am going to copy over some of the code from that Tailwind template. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy all of the JSX. Okay, so we need to mark this page as a use client directive because we are going to use the use state hook in React. So I'm going to import that at the top. And that's from React, just like that. And then we also are going to use the use router hook as well. Because after we register, I want to push them to a specific page. And this is from next/navigation. Just like that. And then next, we have to define what we want to get from the user. So this is where they're going to type in the information. So we could send to a specific API endpoint and then use Next Auth to actually authenticate against the database and log them in. So that is what we're doing. So first we could just say const router equals use router, just like that. And then I am going to have a use state with the data and set data. And we want the name, which is initial value of empty string, email empty string, and password empty string, just like that. So there is our state. And then we, right below, inside of each input, if you look for each input inside of the form, we need the value to be data, because that's the object, and then dot name, the first one. And then on change, we're going to have an anonymous function that's going to set the data, which is the function to change the data state. And is going to change it to the spread syntax. So we're going to keep all of the data the same. And then we're just going to change the name property to the e.target.value, as you can see right here. And then you just go to each input. This is the email. So you have data.email. And then the set data is going to be to the e.target.value, the input. And then password, same thing, data.password, e.target.value. And then there's a register button. And when you click the button, the form is going to have an on submit that is going to call the register user function, which we have to create above the return. So we're going to say const register user is going to be an asynchronous function. First, we're going to prevent the default from happening. After that, we are going to use the fetch request, the fetch web API. So we're going to say fetch, and then we have to fetch from our API endpoint, which we haven't created yet, but we can name it. And this is going to be inside the API folder, /API/register. So we have to create that still. But what we're going to do is we are going to use a post request because we are going to pass in some data to that endpoint. So we're going to say method is post. We are going to pass in the headers as application JSON. We're sending over as JSON data. Next, the body, we're going to stringify all of that data. And that data is technically an object, so we need to wrap it in curly braces just like that. And then after this, right below the fetch and the response, we're going to say const user info. And that is going to await the response.json. So we're going to get that response back, store it inside of the user info variable. And then if you want, you can actually console.log the user info when we get the information back. And then what we could do here is we could say router.push because we initialized the router up there. And then we could push this to the login page because after they register, we want them to log in. Okay, so this looks good, this whole function here, except we haven't closed the register user actual function. So let's do a curly brace at the end, and now everything looks good. So now let's actually create these backend endpoint right here for the API/register. So create another folder in the API called register, and then this page file convention is called route.js. And then inside of the register route.js, let's import a few things at the top. We're going to import bcrypt from bcrypt. We're going to also import the Prism client because we are going to use some Prism methods to actually create a user. And then we could also import the next response at the top as well. Technically, if you're using JavaScript, you don't have to have the next response from next/server. You could just use response. But if you're using TypeScript, you can use next response. But I do this regardless of JavaScript or TypeScript. So let's initialize Prism at the top, just like that. And then, like I said, this is going to be an asynchronous function that is a post request. We are receiving the request. And the first thing is we need that information. We need the name, email, and password from the request.json. So we're going to say const body equals await request.json. It would be body if you're using Node.js, but we are using Next.js, and that is the syntax. And then what we are getting back is we are getting back the name, email, and password, and we're just destructuring it from the body. And if we want, let's test this step out now and actually start a server. So we're going to console log the body. The console should be in the server because this is a server file. And since we didn't finish the whole post request and actually didn't return anything, we are going to get an error thrown. But I just want to make sure the console is there before we actually continue. So we're going to open up localhost 3000. Let's see if we have any other errors as well because we haven't checked. So I'm going to inspect real quick. Console, no errors. So we go to the register page. And as you can see, is literally copy and paste, and you got yourself a nice looking register page. So what we could do here is we could type and register this out. And we're actually not going to register user. We're just going to send stuff back and see if the console actually gets something from that request.json. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Register. Nothing's going to happen, so let's minimize this. Let's look in the console. And we actually didn't initialize Prism yet, so we never actually did npx prism generate. So none of this is going to work, so let's stop the terminal, npx prism generate. That was a step I missed inside the Prism. Okay, so now we could do npm run dev. And as you can see, it is always good to check and console log everything as you go, or you're going to run into problems from the past that you should have solved at that time. So we're going to say Brett1 at Gmail, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, register. Of course, we can error, that's fine. But as you can see here in the console, we are actually getting the data back into the server because you can see it's Brett1 at Gmail, and then password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I wanted to check to make sure everything was going good. Let's do a few checks. So we're going to say if there is no name, no email, or no password, we need to return a new next response. We can have a 400 with the error saying missing name, email, or password. I don't usually like writing it like that. Let me write it like this. Missing name, email, or password, the status of 400, just like that. Okay. So right after that, if they pass that check, we want to see if actually the user is in the database. So we're going to say const exist equals await. We need the prism.user dot find unique, and it's going to be unique where, and whatever one's unique inside of our user schema, which is the email. So we're going to have the email, and it's going to be the email that we got from the body up here from the request.json. So if we check this email and there is a user, right? Then after that, we have to say if it exists, we're going to say email already exists. So if exists is true, which if that variable is true, we can return a new next response that says user already exists with the status of 400. After that, if they pass that check, now we could actually hash the password. So before you actually send a user back to your database, you do want to hash the password and hide it. You want to be keeping your user's information as secure as you can. This is going to be the hash function from bcrypt, and it's going to take in the password, and it's going to take in a salt of 10. So just like that, and that's going to be the new password inside of hashed password. So we want to send the hashed password back to the database, not the password that we get from the body. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a user, const user equals await prism.user.create, and we're having the data object, and inside of it we have the name, which is just the name. We have the email, which is just the email, and then we have the password, which is actually going to be the hashed password. So you can do it like that, or you can just write hashed password just like that. Not a big deal. And then we are going to close the data object, and then we're going to close the create object inside the prism.user.create. And then we are done with the logic inside of this backend. So we are going to return a next response.json of the user. So we're just going to return the user just like that. So that backend should work. And this means we should be able to send a user to our MongoDB database. So let's test that out. So go back to our localhost 3000, refresh the page, and we are going to say Brett1@gmail, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just going to say register, and nothing else should happen because we don't have a login page, so it shouldn't push us. So we have to actually check the database and check the server logs to make sure everything went good. Or you can actually just inspect the page, go to your network tab, and when you log in again, you should be able to get a status of 200. But we could check our database to see if everything went through. We are going to refresh, browse the collection, and so far we don't have anything, so that means we do have an error. So if we go back to our server, everything looks pretty good. Let's try to refresh the database again. And we still don't have any data. So let's go back to our localhost 3000. And I'm glad this is happening while I'm recording because this is just the debug method of how you're supposed to debug your application. So we're going to go to the network tab. 5. So we get a status of 400, missing name, email, or password. So that's what it's saying we're missing. So we are getting stopped at this next response right here because it says if there's no name, no email, or password from the body, then that means we're not getting it. It looks like we're getting the name, email, and body from the password. So the problem must be, let's see, where is the problem? Okay, the problem is when we have it in the console, we are just getting the data object. So this should be data.name, data.email, and data.password, or we could just say it is body.data, just like that. And then if you do body.data for the console log, you will remove this data object and you're just going to get the name, email, and password. So let's try that again. So we refresh the page. We say Brett1@gmail, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. register, we get 500 error now this time. So the 500 error is an internal server error. And what we are getting here is we're getting unknown argument of hashed password and data.hashed password for the user create input. So we are getting an invalid prism.user create. And that is because if you go inside the schema.prism, inside of the user schema, we actually don't have a hashed password in here. And we are sending it to our backend. So we need to have hash password as an optional string right here inside of the users. And if you do make a change inside of any Prisma schema file, you need to stop your server, run npx prism generate, and this will just update all of everything inside the Prism CLI. You could do npm run dev, go to localhost 3000 again, and it's going to be the register page. And let's try it again. Let's open up the inspect, go to the network tab. We fill out the information again. Register. And this time we get a status of 200, and it actually did send us to the login page, which it's saying this page cannot be found because we haven't created a login page. So we did get a status of 200 if you saw it really quick. Now let's go check our database to make sure we have a user. And as you can see, we have a user with a name, email, and a hash password that is hidden in our database. So we now have successfully registered a user, but now let's work on the login portion. So we are going to minimize this. We can close these tabs here at the top. And let's create a login page inside of the app directory. So we're going to have a login. We're going to have a page.jsx. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to literally use the same form on the register page, the UI, inside of the login. And we're just going to require them to log in with their email and password, not name. So I'm going to copy that JSX over again. So let me do an RFC. Call this the login page. Remove everything inside of the JSX. Paste this here, and then let's mark this as a use client because we're using state. We're going to use the use state hook. And then what we are going to do here, we could also import the use router hook as well. And just remember, it's next navigation. Okay, so what we're going to do here is let's define our state at the top. So we're going to say const router first, and then we can just do the state data. And all we're getting is the email and the password, and they're going to be empty values initially. Just like that. And then if you go to each input like we did in the register form, you have a value, which is data.email. And then on change, looking like the spread syntax. And then we're changing the email inside the set data. And the same thing for the password. And on the form, we are having an on submit with a function name called login user. So we have to create the login user function. It's an asynchronous function. We're going to prevent the default. And then what we're going to do here is we, instead of calling a backend login, we are just going to use the sign in function from next/auth, Next Auth. So we're going to import sign in. And this is going to be from Next Auth React. Just like that. Right below the e.prevent default, we're going to use the sign in. And the sign in, whatever provider you're using, that is the name you have to pass in. So if you use Google, you have to type Google. If you're using credentials, you can type credentials. And as you can see here, here's a huge list. All you have to do is type the string, and it gives you a huge list of all the providers you could use to log in. We are going to use the credentials like that. And then what we have to do is we have to pass in the data that we want. So we're going to use the spread syntax, and we're passing in all of the data from this login form. And then I'm going to have a redirect to false because I don't want it to redirect. I want to do the redirect, and I'm just going to say router.push to a dashboard page and then close that login function. let's create a new folder called dashboard to have that page already on hand. Call this page.jsx rfc dashboard page. And then it's just going to say dashboard page for now. So now our functionality is working and we don't have to create a backend route for the login. The reason why is because all the functionality in that login is going to be called inside of that catch-all route, inside of the callback of the asynchronous authorized callback right here. So now we can actually write the logic and check against the database to make sure everything matches, make sure the password matches, make sure there's an actual user associated with the account, and then we can log them in. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to check to see if the email and password is valid. So we're just going to say if there is no credentials.email, and let's have one more right here, label, and then types email. So if we don't have the credentials.email or we don't have the credentials.password, we can throw a new error, or you can return null. Either one is fine. We can leave it like that, return null. Right, if they pass that check, let's just save this and move this comment over. So if they pass that first check and they do type in the email and password in the login page, next thing we want to do is we want to check to see if the user exists. So if the way we do that is we're going to say const user, and we are going to look inside the database using Prism, and the unique is the email. So it's going to be the email is going to be the credentials email. We are going to close the where, and then we're going to close this user variable right here. So if the user does exist, this is good, and this means the code will keep going. And then we're going to say if there is no user, you can return null, and you could just leave it exactly like that. So other than that, we can close. We can close this right here. And then after that, if the user is found, we are going to check to see if the passwords match. So we're going to check to see if the passwords match. And we're going to say const passwords match. And we're going to use the compare function with bcrypt because we're going to compare the password they type, which is the credentials password, to the user dot hashed password. Not password, just the hashed password. So we got to compare the hash password to what they typed, and this function allows us to do that from bcrypt. So when we do that, we are going to say if the passwords don't match, we have to return null. And then after this, we could close this function just like we did. And then below this, we are going to return the user object if everything is valid. So we're just going to say return user. And then let's just make sure everything is closed just like that. And as you can see, we have completely filled out the logic inside of the authorized callback function inside the catch-all route. So let's just quickly go back over it. We're saying if there is no email or password, we return null. If there is a user, we're going to check by using this specific find unique. And if there's no user, we're going to return null. Then we're going to check if the passwords match by using the bcrypt compare. And if they do match, we are going to return the user and let them log in. So what we can do here is we can actually test this out now. So we have Brett1@gmail, and the password I use is 12345. So let's go back to our localhost 3000. We could go into the login page, and what we could do here is we could do Brett1@gmail, and then we should do 12345, we can see if it's successful, and if it is, this should push us to the dashboard. So we need a comma after all of the options, which I don't have after the adapter. So it's a simple mistake right there. And it looks like we are on the dashboard page. Let me just actually, to check to see if we're logged in, we can go to the dashboard. And now I'm going to introduce the useSession hook to allow us to check to see if we are logged in or not. So we can mark this as a use client, and the useSession hook is a useSession provider, and this is what we're going to have to use to wrap the whole application, which is called the session provider. So we could create a folder inside of the route of our project called context, and the file called provider.jsx. We could do RFC. And then what we can import at the top is first we can mark this as a use client. And then we are going to import the session provider from Next.Auth /React. And so I'm doing this in a separate file like this because I don't want to do this inside of the layout, because if you do inside the layout, you're going to have to mark the layout as a use client, and we don't want to do that. So now we are going to take in some children and the session as props, and then we are going to wrap everything in a session provider. It's going to take in the session as a prop right there, and it's wrapping all of the children. So we're exporting it as provider. So let's import it up here as provider. And it's from @context /provider. And then we can wrap all of the body with the provider. So this allows us now to use the useSession hook inside of our application. Just like that. So now we can actually go inside of our dashboard again. We can import the useSession hook. And this is from Next Auth /React. Let's initialize it by saying const data, and the data we're going to rename it as session, and it's the useSession hook. And then what we can do here is we can console log the session. So the console should pull up inside of the client side. So let's go to the console. It's saying null. So let's try to log back in, and we're going to error thrown at us. Loading chunk app client, an error occurred during hydration. Something. Let's go to localhost, see if we still get it. So no, we don't. So let's go to Brett1@gmail. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sign in. And as you can see, we are getting a session object here with the user, with the email of Brett1@gmail.com and the name as Brett. So we are actually getting the session, and we are successfully logged in now using Next Auth. And I want to show you how you could display real quick. But then other than that, that is how you essentially use the credentials provider. And that is a full-blown tutorial on how to do it. But if you do want to use the session, like saying hi, whatever, we could have an H1 that says dashboard. And then we could just have a P tag. And then we could do hi session (user.name). And the reason why you have to have a question mark is because it's optional. So like right when a page loads and you're fetching the session object using the useSession hook, that means you're not going to get it right away like you would if you fetched it on the server. So we're going to say hi and then our name. So that's what should show up on the dashboard. So as you can see, it says hi Brett, and we're still console logging the session. So that is how you use the credentials provider. Like I said, I have other videos of Next Auth tutorials on my channel, so I do recommend you checking those out as well. If you do have any questions, please leave them down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, I hope you liked the video, so if you do, hit that like button and also subscribe for more content just like this.